Going into this birth, we wanted to be completely 180, totally different. And we were looking to have a VBAC. And we were also, we really wanted me to be awake. That was kind of like one of our highest priorities, is for me to be present during the birth. So about 3 days before she was born, I started experiencing contractions at night, which I later probably found out that it was prodromal labor, which is kind of like labor that you can have that stops and starts, but it feels very, very real. And having experienced real labor with our son, I was very much convinced that I was in labor. And that was the night before she was born. So I labored for about 8 to 10 hours, 5 to 7 minutes apart, timeable contractions. Everything looked really good. I wasn't able to sleep. I had to get in and out of the shower. So we thought it was go time. And we even called all of our support in to take Bennett. They took him in the morning, and by 7 a.m., my contraction just completely stopped. Completely gone. And when I say completely gone, they weren't as regular. They were about, 15 to 20 minutes apart. So my mom came over that day, and we just like tackled the house like crazy people. We got every speck of laundry done, everything we could possibly, making phone calls that were so random. But I was on a mission. I guess both of us were. And so I went to bed that night, and we actually went to bed really early at Jeff's recommendation. He's like, let's go to bed as early as we can. So we put Bennett down at 7 p.m. and we went to sleep maybe 15 minutes later. We were like out. And I wasn't feeling the same kind of contractions. I was a little disappointed, but I thought, okay, he's right. We need to get sleep. And I was feeling them on and off, but I was definitely able to sleep through them. And I woke up knowing my water was going to break. Rushed to the bathroom. My water broke and it was clear. And so that was an indicator for us that we were going to stay at home for as long as we could and kind of just labor at home where it was most comfortable. With my son, I was able to labor at home and arrive at the hospital at a 9, fully effaced, what we thought we were really ready to go. So we kind of wanted a similar experience if we could do it. But at the same time, my water broke at about 2 a.m. and little boy was going to be waking up at about 6:30, and I didn't necessarily want to see him for fear that might stall out the labor and become something psychological. And Jeff actually kind of recommended that, and that made a lot of sense to me. And so at that point, we decided that we were going to head to the hospital a little bit earlier than we probably would have. And I was still feeling quite comfortable compared to what I had felt even the night before, which was odd. But my contractions were manageable. They were timeable, probably 5 to 7 minutes apart. But I knew kind of in my head on the way there, I thought I'm about a 5 or a 6. I could tell more by the intensity than I could by the timing. So I know a lot of times, especially the first time, you're like, oh, they're 3 minutes apart, or they're 2 minutes apart, or they're 10 minutes apart. But what I really took away from both of the labors was that the intensity, kind of where you're at emotionally and physically feeling, is much more of an indicator of like, whoa, I need to get to my birthplace, or I can kind of hang where I'm at. Anyways, so we got to the hospital, and indeed I was a 5.5, and everything was looking good. We continued to labor at the hospital, and everything was going fairly well. Mm-hmm. I saw midwives, so I was at Mercy Gilbert, just as a reference. I was seeing the midwives there, and I'd say about, I don't know, you're going to have to help me with time. Maybe 3 to 4 hours later, I was checked again. Yeah. And I was the same. So I was still like a 5 to a 6. And the baby wasn't necessarily descending too much. And I knew for myself too, that was kind of an emotional hurdle that I had to get over. Hearing that the station wasn't increasing because it never did with Bennett. It was always your 9 centimeters minus 2 stations. So his head was so high up. So I was fearful that that's what I was going to hear with her, just because that's what I had experienced with him. Anyways, so they agreed that, what was the first thing that Belinda, I had, since I was a VBAC now I'm kind of remembering all the interventions. So since I was a VBAC, there were a lot of different interventions that kind of had to be placed on me because the doctors are observing and everything. So I had to have the external monitors on the entire time, and they're really, really annoying. So if you can, if you're going in low risk and you're going to be in the hospital, but you want to stay as intervention free as possible, just kind of bargain for that, for those monitors. Can I be 15 minutes on and then, an hour off, or, kind of see what kind of timing you can get with. For me, I didn't really have that option. I had to be continually monitored at all times. So, I wanted to be standing, or sitting on the birth ball, but for some reason the monitors kept falling off and they weren't in the correct place. So it looked like her heart rate was plummeting, and they'd come back in and put them back on, and then they fall off again and put them back on. And the doctors weren't very happy with that. Because they couldn't get that continuous read like they wanted to. So the midwife came in and said, you know what, this isn't necessarily, I feel like everything's going great and you should feel comfortable with that, but the doctors want to see a little bit more continuous monitoring. So that was kind of our first thing where we said, okay, and they put an internal monitor, which they kind of screw an internal monitor into the baby's head. And that was alarming to me. And I had heard about what those were. But again, we kind of decided that, okay, we're moving towards that vaginal birth. That's our goal. This is one of those things that we're going to concede to. And after she was born, I couldn't even see what they had done. So it wasn't as scary as I thought there was going to be this big scar. I mean, now she has this little guy. No, it's not that. So if you got, no, this is unrelated. That's a birthmark. So no, I could not see where they had put an internal monitor on her at all. So it wasn't quite as scary as I thought. So that's something where they internally go up and put it on the baby's head, and then you have something kind of like taped to the side of your leg, but they can get that heartbeat continuously. And I didn't have to wear the silly band anymore. So I also was group B strep positive, so I had to have antibiotics and had to have an IV put in. Once they were done running the antibiotics, I got to be released from the IV, but I was still hooked up a lot. So again, at about 12:30 in the afternoon, that's when one of my midwives switched shifts. So that in my mind, that was I remember a lot during that time. She left me, and at that point, my pain level had definitely increased. I was definitely in a lot more pain, but they were still seeing heart rate decels with every contraction. So they were seeing her heart rate drop where the doctor came, wanted to come in and talk to us about it at every contraction. And so what they were thinking is there's some sort of cord issue. My water had broken, so what they were thinking is that the cord was in some place that it was just there was more pressure being put on the cord, so that with every contraction they were seeing that decel. So when the next midwife came in my head, I did start thinking, okay, if I'm unchanged, having labored for a full 8 hours the night before, and then the night before that also, and then now I'm doing it again, and on top of that, being very still fearful of that second stage pushing phase, which I never got to with my son. I kind of in my head was thinking, okay, if they're going to kind of tack on a couple other interventions, then I'm going to think about an epidural. So that I can kind of ease my mind and ease my fears. Taking away that pain kind of takes away that fear pain cycle that, you get into when you're in labor. So the next midwife came in and we were kind of talking about our options. My next option was that they were going to think about doing something called an amnio infusion, where they put like a saline solution back up in you. To see if that cord problem could regulate her heart rate a little bit. I also tried lots of different laboring positions. I tried squatting through each contraction, and that seemed to help a lot, but it was by far the most painful thing that my body wanted to do. So, but I tried that for a couple hours, actually, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. Squatting through each contraction. It was pretty highly painful. So anyways, when we decided on the amnio infusion, they were going to put that like kind of water saline solution back up in, and they were also going to put another little internal monitor in to monitor my uterine contractions to see how how forceful they were. Because I was kind of on a timeline being a VBAC and also on a timeline because my water had broken. So I had just had extra sets of eyes on me. And so at that point, we did concede to them putting that intrauterine monitor in. It's called an IUPC. I think that's what it's called. It's a pressure catheter, and it's kind of like hooked to the side of your uterus. And they can see how intense your contractions are. Because when you're monitored externally, that doesn't actually show the intensity of the contraction. It just shows like the duration and the frequency of the contraction. So the midwife came in and she said, you know, your contractions, they just might not get us where we need to go in the time frame that doctors want to see it. So she's like, I'm recommending that we do the lowest dose of Pitocin that we possibly can. Pitocin is one of those things I've always been fearful of. And I knew at that point that I would like to receive an epidural before I got the Pitocin. I didn't want to necessarily have to experience Pitocin contractions because I didn't want to experience them. So we did decide on an epidural that was placed, and it was placed pretty easily. I was fearful because of the first time around after I had received that epidural is when his heart rate really completely plummeted. It was minutes afterwards. So that was like, we just had lots of prayer during that time. But this one went really, really well. And I received the epidural. They did the lowest dose of Pitocin that they could. Being a VBAC, they don't want to put too much pressure on your uterus because you have a scar. So after doing that, I was actually able to be pretty comfortable. I was in bed. My nurses were amazing. They had me flipping in different positions. They were watching like hawks, making sure that the nurses got to me before, you know, the doctors had to come in and say, hey, this isn't going well. Like I'd have a nurse in proactively being like, I'm gonna flip you. You know, we need to do this X, Y, and Z. Let's make sure that, you know, we get you this vaginal birth. They were just so awesome. So at that point, I actually was able to rest a little bit. And from there on out, I mean, it went pretty smoothly. If I think about it, from the time we entered the hospital, 7 a.m. to the time I started pushing was 12 hours. So it did take my body a good 12 hours to get from a 5-6 to fully dilated. But they were able to be patient and hang on with me. And that wasn't, you know, it was never an issue. Like you should be a centimeter an hour. Even with Pitocin and an epidural, my body still, it took quite a long time. And epidurals can kind of slow down the process sometimes too. But anyways, so I was checked at about 6:30. They said you're fully dilated and at a +1 station. So in my brain, I was like, all right, we're doing this. It was awesome. I was like, she's actually coming down and out the right way. That's really good. So at that point, my epidural had really faded. Like if you get an epidural, when you first get it, I mean, it is not, like you cannot feel your legs, you cannot move your feet, anything. But after having it in place for 6 hours, I could feel a lot and it was great. And I didn't have them, put more in or anything because I wanted to be able to push. So I felt pressure when I was pushing. I felt pain when I was pushing. I knew when my contractions were coming. Everybody was commenting, you're a great pusher. And I was like, that's because I can feel it. It's off, but I mean, I couldn't feel it like I would have if there was nothing, but I could feel what I was doing, which was really cool. Because I wanted to feel the pain of it a little bit. I wanted, to know what I was doing. So we started pushing at, 7 p.m. And, I pushed for about, I think, an hour. She was born at 7:50 or something. I think it was an hour. I have a video. It felt longer. That's what my sister said too. Everybody in the room was like, it feels so much longer. It's all a blur at that point. Pushed for about an hour, and she was born. When I pushed her head out, she was born with her cord wrapped around her neck 3 times. So they shouted out 3 nuchals. And I was like, 3 waddles? Like what nuchals means like the neck cord. And I could see it because they asked me in the last 10 minutes, do you want the mirror? And at first I said, no, Lord, no. And then at the last 10 minutes, they're like, are you sure you don't want the mirror? And I said, okay, bring it out. Whatever. At that point, I'm like, let's just get this over with. And that totally helped me. I could see exactly what I was doing. And she was born minutes after that. But yeah, I saw her head came out and her cord wrapped around her neck 3 times. So they had to cut, and clamp her cord 3 times. And then she, when she came out, she was quite white. I have the whole video. My mom has it on my phone. It's kind of cool. I've gone back to watch it. They put her on my chest. I'm totally have no idea what's going on, but she's not crying, and she is pretty kind of white. They call her blanched, kind of blanchy white, just because she had that cord so many times. And her first APGARs were a little low. She was like a 5, you know, she wasn't quite getting it. And then, her next score was a little bit higher. They finally got her back to me. And she did awesome there on out. So we were just so happy that she came out the right way. And I think that, and I was awake. Yes, that was our main goal, that I was present for her birth, very present. So